Regardless of whether someone finds me through my work on Unguarded, more generic DBZ related work, or as redirects from other collectors, one of the most common questions I get is in regards to my Frieza collection. I didn't get into such focused, heavy collecting until the end of 2015, but I did have a background that lent itself towards being a resourceful shopper, namely as a thorough researcher and as a seasoned user of online auctions. It's a little too niche to talk about how to try to rebuild this exact collection, so I'll instead use it as an example as I guide you through the basics of collecting merchandise from Japan while outside of Japan. Now, I'm more than happy to eventually do a more thorough walkthrough of this collection with better quality pictures at a later time, but first I have to finish placing the rest of these figures, all the posters, and better organize the card and cell portfolios. So it's just not something I plan to get to for at least a few more months. Feel free to leave questions in the comments if there's something you'd like me to talk about in such a video. I don't plan to make one just for the sake of making one unless people really want me to talk about it. Now, I previously held out making this tutorial because, frankly, collectors are aware of other collectors, and I didn't want to invite a lot of competition in what was a relatively uncompetitive market at the time. The tips and sites I'll discuss are intended as an introduction to the topic. We're really only scraping the surface. Now, the first site I'll discuss is eBay. I've been on the site selling and buying for almost 20 years, so I know my way around. In fact, my first purchase was a little Frieza from Burger King back in 2000. There are two important factors to keep in mind about eBay. The first is that prices vary so significantly that you risk throwing a lot of money away if you don't do your research on market trends. And the second is that unlike how it was when eBay first started, most auctions are no longer true auctions and are instead buy it now. Now keep in mind that many of the items you might be after are imported from Japan. Even if you're buying directly from a Japanese seller on eBay, there's already a good chance that you're going to be paying an increased rate than you would be if you'd used another source. Even when you buy those official figures from stores like Amazon, Barnes & Noble, vendors at a convention, and so on, you're not only paying a much higher rate, you're also waiting 4 to 6 months until after it was already released. Sometimes these prices are similar enough to a proxy rate that it's worth it to go ahead and purchase through eBay. Older and rarer items are going to be higher in price, but even then, you need to check in on the market to see if there are cheaper options available elsewhere. I know that's not the easiest temptation to resist when some holy grail you're finally after gets listed. Now, not only will the prices sometimes be increased to abnormal rates, but you also have to be cautious of drop shippers, flippers, and bootleggers. Now, for the first two, nothing suffices for doing your research, but for the last one, a lot of it is common sense. If it's coming from China at 20% the cost of the going market rate and it uses a stock photo, it's probably not a good idea to purchase that item. Look for actual photos of an item rather than stock photos if there is no mention of it being an official product. And when in doubt, showing a potential buy to a collector familiar with the market can help in giving you confirmation. For your own reference, typically the problem with the Chinese bootlegs is in the paint job, so this might not be as much of a big deal to you if you are planning to repaint it anyway. Something else to consider is that by default, eBay restricts you to your country's version of the site, unless you enable international orders to show. Alternatively, unless your country has restricted access to one of these sites, you can go directly to the alternative versions of the eBay site and shop there. Be aware of variations of spelling when it comes to titles, character names, and so forth, including typos. eBay's search engine is not smart in the sense that it's not going to attempt to autocorrect, and just by trying variants of spellings, you'd be surprised what you can find. So let's say you've done your research and the pricing looks good. Auctions will either be true auctions with an end date and time, buy it now option with the option to purchase the item and end the auction immediately, or a combination of the two. Now with eBay, auctions that incorporate both automatically lose the buy it now option once someone makes an opening bid. If you want to remove the buy it now because you think you can get it for less than that price, my recommendation is to only bid the absolute minimum. Someone is likely going to outbid you in the coming days, and that's fine. You don't want to get into a bidding war. But here's how you win without someone fussing for the high bid spot over several days. Enter sniping. Sniping on eBay, unlike most Japanese auction sites, does not extend the auction. You can bid with literal seconds remaining on the timer and win the auction just before it closes without having to enter a bidding war. There are two ways to do this. The first way is manually. It can be a rush to win this way, but it does require you to be present at your computer or whatever device you're using to place your bids. I recommend tacking on a few extra cents because if you happen to match the previous high bid at the last second, they will still win because their bid preceded yours. So if my max bid is $100, I'm probably going to bid $100 in say 2 or 3 cents when there are around 4 to 5 seconds left in the auction. Sometimes manually sniping just isn't practical. You're asleep, you're at work, or if you're a student in 2001, your dial-up connection isn't the greatest way to try and keep in sync with the site's timer. Reasons. I often use esnipe.com. Other sniping proxies have popped up over the years, but I have never once lost an auction because of a server failure on their end. It's a paid service, but it's cheap, and you don't pay if you don't win. Cancel the bid before the auction ends and so forth, so check them out. Now, the other main site I want to discuss is Yahoo Japan Auctions. Now, when the site first popped up, it used to be accessible to people outside of Japan. It didn't even begin to offer the selection that's available today, but it was still possible to buy directly. When international support was removed, the site didn't go anywhere, but the means of accessing it became less straightforward. Many sellers only speak Japanese, and even if they did speak your language or you spoke Japanese, they weren't willing to deal with international shipping. Ignoring any language barriers, and this applies outside of Japan as well, it can still be more trouble than it's worth. So that brings us to the proxy service. It's your middleman. Sellers in Japan ship to them, and they ship to you. You'll have to pay a small fee on top of double shipping, basically the cost to ship to the middleman and then the cost of the middleman to ship to you, but this is often still much less than you would pay for an item if you'd ordered it on eBay or especially if you had ordered it on Amazon. Now, there are a ton of these services, and each works a little differently, so read reviews and find the one that works for you. I use buyee personally. It includes a free storage period of 30 days as of my making this video, an option to consolidate shipping, a free snipers tool, and a Chrome extension that lets you purchase from other Japanese retailers that don't offer international shipping. You can set the site to display in your language, but you'll notice that the search engine can still be crippling if you don't use Japanese. So this is where research comes in. Now, even if you don't speak Japanese, and I don't, you need to know how to learn characters' names, show titles, and some basic vocabulary. So what I recommend is to keep a working document with search terms and phrases that you regularly intend to use. If you want to learn a particular word for something you've found, you can even work in reverse by using an online translator and deleting portions of the characters until you figure out which characters need omitted to get the word or phrase you want. You can tweak this over time based on what yields you the best results. Now, the auctions on Yahoo Japan themselves work very similarly to eBay with exception to sniping and the Buy It Now function. If you bid within 5 minutes of the auction closing, almost all auctions are set to automatically extend, usually for up to an hour or until 5 minutes have passed with no new bids. It's still in your best interest to not bid until the last few minutes since a lot of people won't be watching the auction when it ends. Unlike eBay, auctions on Yahoo Japan that include an auction timer and a Buy It Now option don't drop the Buy It Now option once someone places a normal bid. So there's no reason to ever bid early on a Yahoo Japan auction unless you're buying it out. As a final aside, recall that I mentioned that collectors are aware of other collectors. While it's no longer possible to see complete usernames for anyone with whom you aren't having a transaction on these sites, you'll still recognize bits of hidden names if you run into someone who collects the same merchandise you do. Now, you can easily learn your competitors' bidding and capping tendencies if you pay attention, and that means you can use it against them. Keep in mind, though, that they can do the same. In general, my recommendation is to befriend other collectors when you can. You'd be surprised how often people might be willing to step aside on an auction if you admit you're more interested in a certain auction or to reciprocate your having stepped aside for them in the past. And that's it. I'll leave a few group links in the comments, If possible, join one of the many collector groups that are relevant to what you're after. While no collector may be willing to give you all of their secrets, many are happy in helping you to get started or to answer basic questions.